The iron fireplace in the corner of the cabin groaned as a harsh gust of wind forced a pine-scented draft down the chimney. Nick Vance leaned against the weathered timber bar, swirling the amber whiskey in his heavy glass, while the steady ticking of the wall clock measured out his 28th birthday. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the dense hemlock forest stretched endlessly into the pitch-black wilderness of Black Ridge Valley. The full moon hung bloated and brilliant above the tree line, bathing the snow-speckled canopy in a stark, silver glare. To Nick, the only guy crazy enough to drag us 3 hours away from a self-service for a weekend, Mark declared, raising a mason jar filled with dark cider. Mark's loud laughter usually warmed the room, but tonight it felt slightly forced against the oppressive silence of the surrounding woods. Sitting across from him at the heavy oak table, Chloe adjusted her wool sweater and offered a faint smile, though her eyes kept drifting toward the dark glass panes. "It really is beautiful out here, Nick, but those signs at the gas station down in the valley were creepy," she admitted softly, tracing the rim of her mug. "You mean the missing poster for that park ranger?" Sam asked from the shadow of the doorway leading to the porch. Sam had been pacing all evening, his skin pale and slick with a fine sheen of cold sweat despite the roaring fire. He kept flexing his right hand, his knuckles red and raw as if suffering from a sudden spike of arthritis. The locals always spin stories about rogue bears or wild dogs whenever someone loses their way in Black Ridge, Nick said, trying to anchor the room with a calm tone. "Bears don't open cabin deadbolts from the outside, Nick," Sam snapped back, his voice tighter and harsher than usual. The sudden venom in Sam's tone caught everyone off guard, causing Mark to lower his glass. "Take it easy, man," Mark said gently, rolling his shoulders. "It's just local folklore to keep tourists from wandering off the marked trails after dark." Sam didn't answer. He simply turned his back to the group and stared back out into the tree line, his shoulders rigid and hunched. Nick watched his friend closely, noting how Sam's chest heaved with shallow, rapid breaths. For the past 2 days, Sam had refused to eat anything cooked on the cast iron skillet, complaining that the smell of hot fat made him nauseous. Even more peculiar was how Sam had flinched earlier that evening when Chloe offered him an heirloom antique silver fork, dropping it onto the floor as if it had burned his skin. "Look, let's just focus on the cake," Chloe said, attempting to clear the growing tension in the room. She reached for the silver-plated cake server Nick's sister had packed, holding it out towards Sam to hand off. Sam recoiled instantly, knocking his chair over backward as he scrambled away from the table. "Keep that damn thing away from me," he snarled, his voice dropping into an unnerving guttural register that didn't sound human. The room fell dead silent, except for the crackle of burning logs in the hearth. Mark chuckled nervously, picking up the overturned chair. "Okay, man, what is wrong with you tonight?" Mark asked, stepping towards Sam. "You've been jumpy ever since we crossed the river." Before Sam could reply, a low resonant thump echoed against the cabin's western exterior wall. It wasn't a gentle scrape of a wind-blown branch, it was a heavy, deliberate impact that vibrated through the thick pine logs. Nick froze, his eyes instantly darting toward the western wall where his hunting rifle hung mounted on wooden pegs. The temperature in the room seemed to plunge immediately, as if the cold outside had seeped through the chinks in the mortar. "Is that an animal?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling as she backed away from the window. A long, drawn-out scrape followed, the sound of massive, hardened claws dragging slowly down the cedar siding. High above the roofline, a terrifying sound erupted, a deep, chest-rumbling howl that rose in pitch until it shattered the night's stillness. It was not the high, musical call of a timber wolf, but a predatory roar filled with intelligent malice. The glass in the large, panoramic window shuddered violently as the echo died away. Nick stepped toward the mantel, his fingers wrapping around the cool wood of his lever-action rifle. "Mark, check the backroom lock. Chloe, get away from the glass," Nick ordered, racking the bolt to chamber a cartridge. When he turned back toward the table, his heart sank into his stomach. Sam was missing from the doorway, the screen door swinging open on a creaking hinges into the freezing night air. A faint trail of red droplets stained the floorboards leading outside, mixed with dark, coarse fur that hadn't been there minutes before. Nick looked out through the open door into the shadows, realizing with sickening certainty that whatever was hunting them had been inside the room all along. The cold mountain air rushed through the open door, carrying the metallic scent of pine sap and fresh blood. Mark lunged forward and slammed the thick door shut, throwing the heavy iron deadbolt into place with a loud clatter. "He just ran out there," Mark gasped, his hands trembling as he checked the frame. "Nick, he ran straight into the woods, without a jacket." "Sam didn't run away," Chloe whimpered, pointing a shaking finger at the threshold. In the dim light of the fireplace, dark tufts of coarse, wire-like hair were caught in the wooden latch mechanism. Nick knelt beside the door, his heart hammering against his ribs as he inspected the floorboards. The red droplets weren't from a scrape. They were pooled near deep gouges in the oak planking, as if heavy claws had pushed off with immense force. "He flinched at the silver cake server, Mark," Nick said quietly, raising his rifle so the barrel pointed toward the ceiling. "He dropped the silver fork earlier tonight, and he hasn't eaten real food in 2 days. Mark shook his head violently, backing away toward the kitchen island. "No, absolutely not. That's insane," Mark stammered, his eyes darting between Nick and the dark windows. "Sam is a CPA from Chicago. He's not some myth from a movie." A sickening crunch echoed from directly above their heads, followed by the slow, heavy thud of weight moving across the roof shingles. The creature wasn't frantically pacing, it was moving with deliberate, calculated precision, testing the structural strength of the timber ceiling. "It knows where we are," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with panic as dust fell from the exposed roof beams. "Nick, what do we do?" "We head for the cellar underneath the kitchen," Nick commanded, keeping his eyes locked onto the ceiling rafters. "The walls down there are solid poured concrete, and the door is reinforced oak." Mark moved first, grabbing a heavy flash lantern from the counter, while Chloe stayed tight behind Nick's shoulder. They moved across the main room, every footstep heavy against the quiet horror settling over the cabin. Suddenly, the roof beam above the dining table cracked with a sound like a gunshot. A massive, fur-matted arm shattered through the cedar shingles and drywall, showering the room with splinters and insulation. The limb was gargantuan, easily 3 times the thickness of a human arm, covered in dark slate-gray fur and tipped with curved, obsidian-like claws. The arm reached down with predatory grace, its elongated fingers sweeping across the tabletop, shattering the glass whiskey bottles, with hundreds of glinting shards. Chloe screamed as a sharp piece of flying glass nicked her neck. Nick raised the rifle, aligned the iron sights with the dark mass above the ceiling, and pulled the trigger. The deafening report of the rifle exploded in the enclosed space, filling the air with the sharp stink of cordite. The lead bullet struck the creature's forearm, but instead of a roar of pain, the beast let out an eerie, guttural chuckle that echoed down through the open hole. The massive arm pulled back out through the roof, leaving a jagged opening that exposed the dark night sky and the glowing full moon above. "Run," Mark yelled, tearing open the heavy trapdoor in the kitchen floorboards that led to the cellar steps. Mark scrambled down the steep wooden ladder first, holding the lantern high to illuminate the dark stone basin below. Chloe followed quickly, her hands gripping the ladder rungs with frantic energy. Nick covered the rear, keeping his rifle leveled at the shuttered ceiling as he backed down the wooden steps. Just as his boots hit the cool concrete floor of the cellar, a shadow blotted out the moonlight streaming through the main room windows above. A towering silhouette crouched on the roof edge above the trapdoor frame. It was nearly 8 feet tall, a terrifying hybrid of a muscular human torso and a massive black wolf, with elongated jaws framing teeth like bone needles. Its yellow eyes glowed with an unmistakable, cruel intelligence as it locked gaze with Nick. Down in the dark cellar, Mark pulled on the iron handle of the trapdoor, drawing the heavy oak door shut. Nick threw the iron latch into place just as a violent blow slammed against the outer wood. The oak creaked, but held firm against the brute strength above. "It's not trying to break the door down immediately," Nick whispered, breathing heavily in the dim yellow light of Mark's lantern. "It's patient. It wants to wear us down." The heavy oak trapdoor vibrated gently under the weight of the beast resting on the floorboards above. Silence settled over the dark cellar, broken only by the rhythmic dripping of water from a damaged copper pipe near the back wall. Chloe sat on a dusty wooden crate, her knees pulled tight against her chest as she pressed a sleeve against the small cut on her cheek. Mark stood near the concrete wall, his breath coming in white plumes as the cold subterranean air settled around them. "It's sitting right on top of us, isn't it?" Mark whispered, his eyes fixed on the thick oak joints supporting the floor above. "It knows we can't stay down here forever without heat or water." "It's waiting," Nick replied, pacing the length of the poured concrete floor while inspecting his rifle. A normal wild animal would have stormed in or given up when it couldn't reach us immediately. Sam, or whatever he's become, is playing a waiting game because he knows how freezing it gets down here. Nick checked his leather cartridge belt, counting only 3 remaining lead rounds for his lever-action rifle. He remembered the bullet hitting the creature's arm upstairs. Standard lead was useless against the monster's unnaturally dense muscle and rapid regeneration. "We need something that can actually stop it, or at least wound it enough so we can reach the truck," Nick muttered, sweeping his flashlight across the dusty shelves lining the back wall. The cellar was packed with forgotten odds and ends from previous cabin owners, antique mason jars, rusty iron tools, and old kerosene lamps. Chloe stood up slowly, her flashlight beam tracking across a row of wooden storage boxes near a heavy iron furnace. "Nick, look over here," she said, pointing to a small lock-sealed wooden chest sitting on a high stone ledge. The chest was lined with brass fittings and bore an engraved plaque that read, Black Ridge Forest Regard, 1954. Mark stepped over and used a rusty crowbar from the floor to pry the rusted padlock off the chest with a loud metallic snap. Inside lay 2 old flare pistols wrapped in oiled canvas, alongside a box of brass-cased signal cartridges. Beside the flares sat a velvet pouch containing 4 heavy, tarnished silver coins, commemorative forestry medals awarded decades ago. Silver, Mark breathed, his eyes wide as he picked up one of the heavy coins. The old folklore it actually works on these things? It burned Sam when he touched the silver fork upstairs, Nick reminded him, picking up the heavy metal coins and inspecting their weight. Nick quickly pulled the lead bullets from his remaining 3 rifle cartridges using a pair of pliers from the workbench. He carefully melted the lead out of the brass casing using a small butane blowtorch found on the shelf. Using a heavy iron vise, Nick hammered and shaved 2 of the silver coins down into rough, dense silver slugs that fit snugly into the empty brass casings. He hand-crimped the metal around the custom silver slugs, creating 2 crude but functional silver-tipped cartridges. "We only have 2 shots," Nick warned, loading the custom silver rounds into the rifle's magazine. "Mark, take one of those flare guns. Magnesium burns at 3000 degrees, which should give us visual coverage and slow it down." "What about the truck?" Chloe asked, pointing toward a small ground-level coal chute on the north wall that led out toward the driveway. The metal hatch of the coal chute was narrow but large enough for a person to crawl through into the snow outside. Suddenly, a loud, deliberate dragging sound echoed from the main floor above their heads. The beast was no longer resting on the trapdoor. It was slowly dragging the heavy cast iron fireplace heart directly over the trapdoor frame. With a deafening screech of scraping metal, the heavy iron mass settled over the door, effectively trapping them inside the basement from above. The monster was sealing off their main exit, forcing them to use the narrow coal chute where it could ambush them in the open driveway. "It's directing our movement," Nick said, his jaw tightening as he turned toward the narrow metal coal chute. "It wants us to crawl out into the open so it can pick us off one by one. Then we don't give it a clean target," Nick declared, unbolting the rusty latch of the coal chute. The icy night air slammed into the small cellar as Nick unbolted the iron coal chute, bringing with it a dusting of powder snow. Through the rectangular metal hatch, the snow-covered driveway shimmered under the blinding glare of the full moon. The engine of Nick's heavy 4-wheel drive pickup truck sat roughly 40 yards away, parked near the edge of the dark pine tree line. "Mark, you go first and get the flare gun ready," Nick whispered, handing the heavy brass launcher to his friend. "Chloe, stay right behind him, and don't stop running for the truck no matter what you hear behind you." Mark nodded grimly, squirming on his belly through the tight metal chute until his boots cleared the outer stone foundation. Chloe followed immediately after, her fingers digging into the frozen dirt pad as she slithered out into the snow bank. Nick climbed through last, cradling his lever-action rifle against his chest to keep the firing mechanism clear of frost. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the wind dropping to a faint murmur that barely stirred the pine needles overhead. They crouched low behind a stack of cordwood, their warm breath forming dense white clouds in the freezing air. High above them, on the cabin roof, the shadowed silhouette of the werewolf crouched near the chimney stack, its silver-furred throat vibrating with a quiet, purring growl. The creature's elongated ears twitched toward the cordwood pile, It had anticipated their escape route through the coal chute. With effortless fluid motion, the massive beast leapt down from the roof ridge, landing silently in the deep snow 30 feet away. It rose onto its powerful hind legs, towering nearly 8 feet tall, its broad chest bare against the biting cold. Yellow, intelligent eyes locked onto Nick with unsettling recognition, the lips pulling back to reveal sharp, dripping fangs in an almost human sneer. "Mark, shoot the snow in front of it, now!" Nick hissed, stepping out from behind the woodpile to draw the beast's focus. Mark pulled the trigger on the flare pistol, firing a screaming crimson orb of blinding magnesium light directly into the snowbank at the monster's feet. The intense heat and blinding light exploded into the night, popping violently as it hit the frozen snow and blinding the creature's night-adapted vision. The werewolf let out an enraged roar, shielding its eyes with one massive arm while swiping blindly at the burning flare. "Go! Run for the truck!" Nick roared, thrusting his hand into his pocket to retrieve the vehicle's remote key fob. With a double press of the button, the truck's headlights flashed bright yellow and the horn chirped loudly, unlocking all 4 doors. Mark grabbed Chloe's arm, hauling her through the knee-deep snow toward the passenger door. The monster recovered faster than expected, turning away from the sputtering red flare and lunging toward Mark with terrifying speed. It covered 15 feet in a single bound, its massive claws extended to rip open the tailgate of the truck. Nick raised his lever-action rifle, aiming directly at the creature's center mass where the chest muscles met the rib cage. He squeezed the trigger, firing the first hand-crafted silver round into the darkness. The sharp bang echoed through the valley, accompanied by a bright flash of blue-white fire from the muzzle. The custom silver slug struck the werewolf directly in the right shoulder with devastating force. Unlike the lead bullet earlier, the silver scorched the creature's flesh upon impact, sending black smoke rising from the wound as a high-pitched, agonizing howl tore from its throat. The beast stumbled backward into the snow, thrashing violently as its body rejected the toxic burning of the pure metal. Nick didn't wait to see if it would get back up. He racked the rifle's lever, chambering his second and final custom silver cartridge. He sprinted to the driver's side of the pickup, sliding onto the bench seat as Mark slammed the passenger door shut. "Start it! Start the engine, Nick!" Chloe screamed from the back seat, her hands frantically checking the lock toggles. Nick threw the rifle onto the floorboards, shoved the key into the ignition cylinder, and cranked the powerful starter motor. The big V8 engine roared to life with a deep rumble, shaking the snow off the hood wipers as Nick slammed the transfer case into 4-wheel drive. Just as he shifted the transmission into drive, a massive weight slammed onto the vehicle's hood with bone-jarring force. The werewolf had leapt from the snowbank, its injured shoulders steaming with black fluid as it used its left arm to shatter the front windshield glass. Sharp safety glass showered the front seat, and the creature's elongated jaw snapped inches from Nick's face, its foul, hot breath stinking of copper and rot. Nick grabbed the lever-action rifle from the floorboards with his right hand, jamming the muzzle directly into the creature's open maw. "Happy birthday to me, Sam," Nick snarled, pulling the trigger at point-blank range. The second silver round discharged straight into the roof of the beast's mouth, igniting it in a blinding flash of white sparks. The monster let out a muffled, gurgling roar as the silver shattered its jaw and penetrated its nervous system. The massive body convulsed wildly before losing its grip on the broken windshield frame, tumbling backward off the hood as Nick stomped on the accelerator pedal. The heavy pickup truck lurched forward, its stubbed snow tires chewing through the ice and spinning past the writhing shape in the driveway. Through the cracked rear-view mirror, Nick watched the monster slowly stagger back to its feet in the red glow of the taillights, clutching its ruined face as it shrank into a dark timber line. They tore down the winding mountain road toward the safety of the valley, leaving Black Ridge and its nightmare far behind in the freezing dark.